ecosystem. We are talking about ecosystem. No, the other day we have talked about the ecosystem. They have two types of components: biotic and abiotic. So it is a biotic component that we are talking about. What is it? These are the plants and the animals, the living components, components which are able to multiply, grow, reproduce. So we are talking about living components. What are the categories? Let us try understanding the biotic components. One category of the biotic components. The first category we are talking about producers, also known as autotrophs. Producers, also known as autotrophs. Second, next is we talk about the consumers. Consumers, and the consumers will also be termed as heterotrophs. What is the major difference, first of all, to understand between these two terms? When I talk about autotrophs and heterotrophs, what is the meaning of autotrophs? It's a word very often organisms which can make their own food, organisms which can prepare their own food, producers, hence known as producers. Example, plants. We talk about the green plants, we talk about the algae. Can we talk about bacteria coming in this category? Blue-green algae majorly are autotrophs. When we are talking about the second group, heterotrophs, now there can be many types under this. We are talking about consumers. Why consumers? Because they cannot manufacture their own food and they are dependent on other organisms for their food. Consumers. These consumers, again, now that we talk about, are of various types. Let us look into what are the different types of consumers. We would talk about, now that we are going to talk about an example of a food chain. What are some of the groups? Consumers can be primary consumers. Consumers, one type can be primary consumers. Primary consumers can also be termed as what? Primary consumers are also known as herbivores. Herbivorous. We talk about secondary consumers. Secondary consumers would be basically the small carnivores. The small carnivores, but we generally say small carnivores. Secondary. Next is the tertiary consumers. What do we talk about? These are the big carnivores. When you write a food chain, you will have to remember the groups and the categories. What are consumers? The simple concept is any type of an organism which is not capable of manufacturing its own food are consumers. So primary consumers are what? If I give you an example, what should I tell you? Primary consumers would be the cow and the cattle and the goat and the sheep. Primary consumers. Secondary consumers, small carnivores, I said. Small carnivores would be something like snake, frogs. Frogs are basically insectivorous. Okay. I would say something like the lizards, also frogs, also jackal, also foxes, also. Rats to some extent, yes, rats also. Fox, correct. So now, when I talk about the tertiary, yes, tell me. Humans will not come under these two groups because humans would come at the topmost level where we are considered as omnivores. We are omnivores, absolutely. So now that we are talking about carnivores, we are not actually carnivores. Neither we are herbivores. We are omnivores, and we are always in any particular food chain you talk about. We are always at the last level, highest level. So what are the two levels we are talking about? Secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and at least one example each case you have to understand.
You said that
herbivores, yes, herbivores, carnivores, omnivores also you have to talk about. Tell me.
Ma'am, you said that under tertiary consumers we have jackals and foxes.
Tertiary, when we talk about secondary, there we would generally include examples like the smaller type of carnivores. Smaller type of carnivores would be the fox. Bigger type of carnivore would be the wolf and the tiger and the lion. So when we are talking about
predators,
the predator, the jackal is also a predator, the lion is also a predator. So where we are only talking about the simpler form and the complex form.
Also much larger
and more complex body type. Complex. We don't say strong. when we are talking about the levels, it is more complexity of their body, the jaw parts, the teeth parts, etc. Complexity should be more.
Behavior also comes.
Behavior meaning what type of food they feed on. Now we are talking primarily on the food habits. Behavior, not exactly. We are not
How
talking about
they
food habits.
how they hunt.
Not at all. Not at all. Habit, no. No, we are not talking about any type of a behavioral feature of any animals right now. We are only trying to understand what type of animal will feed on what type. What? Now this chapter is all about that only. What type of animal will feed on what type. So now, top carnivores, we will write one food chain where we write down the last level. The last level is always the top carnivore. Yes, the tertiary carnivore. Can it be a top carnivore at times? Yes. At times it may not be also. So what are consumers? Basic definition is what? Basic difference is what? With the autotrophs. Consumers are organisms which cannot prepare their own food. What are the two primary categories? The two primary categories, herbivores and carnivores. But yes, carnivores based on their complexity and feeding habit again can be differentiated. What are the two primary groups? Small carnivores and larger carnivores. So we can also say secondary carnivore, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. But is it all about consumers when we have to talk about? Is it all about consumers? No. The food chain may also have some other group of organisms in certain food chain, not in all. What are the other type of organisms? Remember, we are also to talk about organisms known as omnivores. What is the basic difference when I talk about omnivores, when I talk about this? And the omnivore is always at the top level, top trophic level, the last trophic level in a food chain. Omnivores, what are some examples of the omnivores? Bear, human, others, crows are basically scavengers, dogs. So dogs are there, wolves are the bear are there, we human are there. Wolves would be basically carnivorous. Wolves are carnivorous. Cats carnivorous. Cats also carnivorous. Reptiles are primarily carnivorous or insectivorous. Reptiles basically insectivorous, most of them, and carnivorous. Some of them large carnivores.
Another bird also, no, that is omnivore.
Many such type of birds that we talk about are basically scavengers. Most of the bigger forms of birds are scavengers. Carnivorous birds, yes, when we talk about the carnivorous birds like we talk about the hawk, yes, the kite and the hawk. And even bigger, we talk about the eagle and the vulture. So based on the complexity. Dead flesh. Okay, so these basic differences, yes. Cheetah, no, it's a truly carnivorous animal. Cheetah will come under tertiary carnivore. It is a big carnivore. It will eat only flesh. The cheetah will never feed on any type of a plant food. Cheetah does not feed on any type of a plant food. So, what is the basic difference? Omnivorous, carnivorous. What will you write? One example each you should know. Omnivorous type of animal form which can feed both on the plant and animal food. Carnivorous, absolutely dependent on animal food. Look into now the word parasites. Now, exactly when we talk about consumers, we may not be able to fit in the concept of parasites in every food chain, but yes, there are certain type of food chain where this group of organisms also may find their place. What are parasites now here? What are parasites? What is the basic concept of parasitism? What is parasitism? They feed on a host. The host is dead or living? Living host. And is the parasite able to digest the complex food substances inside the body? Not at all. So when we are talking about the parasites, what type of organisms are they? These group of organisms are always dependent on a living host and feeding on soluble nutrients from the body of the host, either remaining attached to the outer surface of the body or entering inside. If they remain attached to the outer surface of the body, these are known as ectoparasites. If they enter the body and then derive the nourishment, then they will be termed as endoparasites. Then they will be termed as endoparasites. Let us talk about 1-2 examples each category. If I talk about ectoparasites, I told you they are able to take in nourishment from the body of the host but remaining attached to the external surface of the host. Leeches, mosquitoes. No, fungus doesn't come in this category at all. The bed bugs, the lice, the head lice, the fleas and the ticks. All these organisms are never entering the body of the host at all, and they will always take nourishment remaining on the outer surface of the body. Endoparasites, tapeworm, the roundworm,
Fungus.
no fungus. Why are you so much in love with fungus? Fungus will not fit in this category at all. When we are talking about fungus, is not a parasite at all. So when we are talking about endoparasites, variety of different type of roundworms, the pinworms, the hookworms, all these, which may tapeworm, the flatworms, all the tapeworms that we understand. All these different type of worms may enter the body of the host. Do they enter in the mature form? No, they don't enter in the mature form. They would always enter in the egg stages. Where will these egg stages be? The egg stages would always be on the leafy substance, the green leafy vegetables. If they are not cooked, washed properly, then they enter our body. Fruits, vegetables, if they are not washed properly, cooked properly, yes, there are chances that they may enter into the body. So that's the reason these parasites, endoparasites, primarily they are present in the bigger animal forms like the cattle in cow or in human. Majorly in the cattle they are present because they are constantly grazing on the leaves, or the leaves may contain green leafy parts of the plant.
Humans or tapeworms are
Lesser. In human population, tapeworm is much lesser. Roundworms, I talk about ringworm is not a worm. When we are talking about the roundworms like the pinworms, the hookworms, which for example the people or gardeners, when they are constantly working in the garden, coming in contact with the soil, which has got the egg stages. And there are some hookworms and pinworms which may penetrate through the skin and enter into the bloodstream.
or into the ear or something.
Into the ear. No, these are not the worms which will enter the ear. Worms basically will not. These are just the ticks and the fleas from the pets. That they enter.
Will the parasites still feed on the body if it is dead?
If the parasite,
Still feed on the body if it's dead?
if the parasite is dead,
The host body.
host is dead. No, obviously not. The host is dead. The parasite obviously doesn't get adequate amount of nourishment. So at that time we are not considering these as scavengers. Of course not. They don't become scavengers. Parasites are parasites which depend on living host always. The host is dead. Parasite is also dead. Come to the next concept, decomposers. Yes.
The parasite, like it can leave the body, right? It is not like if the host
They will not leave the body. They will remain inside the dead body also for a long time. They can survive for a long time even if the host body is dead.
But how do we do that?
How do you know, Millie?
Sorry.
How do you know?
Ma'am, I have heard about parasites or some type of like similar organisms. They are present in the eye area.
They are not present in the eye. There are various different type of worms which enter the body in those egg stages which are not seen.
But how do they enter?
Listen first. Keep on dragging with your question for 5 minutes. Now, when we are talking about this, these are certain type of worms. Variety of worms are there, and these worms may be present on the green leaves on the fruits, which one has not washed, cleaned, cooked properly. Now, these enters inside the body, and they may enter into the blood. Quite a number of them they enter into the muscle cells. Quite a number of them they travel by the way of the blood and get deposited also into the nerves. So now, if you are talking about the ones which are entering into the eye part. The ones which are entering into the eye part, these are those special type of worms that we are talking about which are affecting the nervous system, sensory organs, they affect the nerves. One such disease you will come across when you know this is the level. You must have read under the chapter disease. Why do we follow? Japanese, which is not there for you all. Japanese encephalitis is a condition where people suffer from such type of nervous disorders because of the worm infection in the brain, worm infection in the eye. There are many conditions which has happened where the worm starts traveling to sensory parts of the body, sensory organs there. Take the concept of decomposers. Rats are basically small group of carnivores. Rats would basically not feed on the plant parts. Yes, occasionally they feed on grains, but it is not a true herbivore. It is not a true herbivore. Yes.
And viruses are also dependent on the living force. So do they
Viruses
are also dependent on the living force. So do they come under
not
parasites?
parasites. Parasite is an organism well formed.
Live organism.
The parasite is an organism which is well formed. Virus is not an organism at all. It is not a cell at all. Viruses are just some proteins, and inside the protein some DNA thread. That is a virus. A virus is not a complete cell also. But the parasites you talk about, the roundworm, the leeches, these are well-defined organisms, well-formed organisms.
Ma'am, so why another difference that could be between parasites and viruses is that before entering the host, the viruses are not really alive. So
Viruses and parasites are not a comparison at all. Viruses are wide apart. Viruses are just a particle actually. In the concept of biology, viruses are just a particle. And this particle, the moment they enter our body along with the nose or the brain, whatever, they start affecting our cells and the DNA.
They become active as they enter the body.
That's a particle. It's not a cell also, remember. Why are you showing your sense of teeth? As usual, 9th से 10th में धक्का खा के आ गए, but then no seriousness at all. In the 9th standard entire year, I think more than 100 times you told this word. Huh? Is it serious in other subjects, physics, maths? Little bit. If I see your sets of teeth, I'm really going to break them now. You are now in the 10th. Give me smart answers. Ask 100 questions. You will not show me your sets of teeth like the 9th standard at all. And horrible performance. Okay, what I told you is decomposers. Now let us talk about another category of consumers. What are consumers? Organisms which cannot prepare their own food. Now we are talking about decomposers. Let us understand. There's a dead plant part. There's a fallen fruit. There are some dead plant parts fallen on the soil. After a month or two, and now that it is raining, after a month or two, are we going to see those dead parts of the plant and the animal on the soil? No, they will get mixed with the soil. How did this happen? Because of the process of decomposition. Which type of organisms are responsible for the process of decomposition? Bacteria, very much responsible for the process of decomposition. But now, is the process of decomposition a beneficial process for the plant, for the soil? Is it a beneficial process for the environment? I talk about decomposers. What type of organisms are basically decomposers? Bacteria. The various different groups of bacteria. These are decomposers. Are fungi decomposers? Not at all. Fungi are not decomposers here. So whenever we talk about the decomposition of a plant part, animal part, and then mixing up with the soil and various advantages that the soil enjoys, the environment enjoys, what type of organism responsible for decomposition? Bacteria. What are some of the, yes, I come to you. What are some of the benefits? What are some of the benefits? Now that the process of decomposition has happened, the topmost layer of the soil became even more fertile than before. What is the topmost layer of the soil known as? Humus. The topmost layer of the soil, if I talk about the red soil, if I talk about the loamy soil, the topmost layer always appears more darker than the rest of the layers. Why? Because it has got a layer which is formed by the decomposition. What type of organisms involved? Bacteria involved. But now, what is the relation of bacteria with that of the fungi here? How are fungi associated here? These fungi are known as saprophytes. And what is the difference between saprophytes and decomposers? Now that the process of decomposition is happening, enough of cooking of food is going on, now the fungal spores will start developing there. Now the fungal spores start developing and flourishing, and enough of fungal growth. Did the fungus help in the process of decomposition? Not at all. But the fungus has just absorbed the soluble nutrients and they themselves have grown.
So the bacteria is decomposing and
Maybe you get questions, name the organism responsible for the process of decomposition, not to write fungi at all. Your favorite word. No fungus. It is only the bacteria.
But it's sacrificed.
Yes, ma'am.
Fungi. That is the thing. Always underline bacteria. Fungi does not undergo the process of decomposition. Fungi are always there in the site of decomposition, but they are only to absorb the soluble nutrients and then they flourish.
So, ma'am,
They
they
always
are taking
flourish.
the nutrients for their own benefit.
Own benefit. I talk about a bread which is stale. I talk about a fruit which is getting rotten. Did we ever see fungal growth over there? Yes, very much. Did you ever see the fungal growth on an orange or on the outer surface of a lemon or the surface apple on the surface of the bread, etc., etc.? Already cooked food. Say suppose your mother has she forgot to keep the food on the sweets. The food has she forgot to keep it inside the fridge, and in the heat, 12 hours enough to get rotten. There's a smell, and then the next day you get to see a cottony growth there over there. So what is happening? Decomposition has started not by the fungus, it's by the bacteria always. 2-3 points you have to remember. What is the benefit of decomposition? Now that the process of decomposition happening, what is the benefit? Number one, decomposition improves the quality of the soil. Decomposition improves the water retaining capacity, the water retention. I talk about in a sandy soil, desert-like conditions. In the sandy soil, does the process of decomposition happen enough? No, because bacteria is not there anyway. Because moisture and humidity is not there anyway. The temperature is just very high. The temperature is so high and there is so much of dryness that the process of decomposition cannot happen. But I talk about the soil conditions, something surrounding us, adequate amount of moisture, humidity, temperature, sunlight, more or less everything ambient enough, optimum enough, then what would happen? The process of decomposition would happen. Faster, much faster. So now when I'm talking about them, these type of soil, are they able to hold water more or the desert-like soil? These type of water. The loamy soil you talk about, the red soil you talk about, the alluvial you talk about. Yes, differential amount, but they can hold water. What else? These type of soil, they are more porous, aerated because of the bacteria constantly releasing the carbon dioxide. Bacteria constantly releasing carbon dioxide, so that's the reason they are constantly aerated. The soil is porous. Is this the same condition in the desert-like conditions, the sandy conditions? No. Again. So what are some of the 2-3 points that obviously you have to remember? Can you tell me one major benefit of decomposition to the environment?
It makes the soil that the decomposition occurring on, it makes it porous.
I told you already. Tell me something more.
The
Nutrient level is high. Remember this point again. By the process of decomposition, the bulk of the waste substances are minimized. If the process of decomposition by the way of the bacteria would not have taken place, and the biotic components only constantly they get heaped up. We are saying that if the pollutants are biodegradable, then they are good enough. Dead parts of the plants and animals are better than a sheet of plastic and rubber. Okay, we are saying that. But these dead parts of the plants and animals, just imagine, under a tree, the leaves and the fruits and the flowers are constantly shedding and falling, and this particular region of the soil is not showing decomposition at all. What will happen? Heaps formed, foul smell coming up. The soil quality degraded or improved? Degraded. So it is only the process of decomposition which is making it better. So what is the one point that also you should remember? Decomposition minimizes the load of the waste substances also. Does biodegradable waste substance result into pollution? Yes, if the process of decomposition is not fast. Foul smell is there, and these waste substances and the gases which are leaching into the deeper layers of the soil, they may also enter into the water body. If heaps and heaps of waste substances, never mind all are biodegradable, but the waste and the land cover and the decomposition all should be at par. Then there is no problem. Land cover small, heap is more, decomposition not happening. then there's a big problem. Yes,
It
Ravi?
takes years for a plastic to get decomposed.
Yes, but it does decompose. It does break down. I should not say decompose. It does break down in parts and pieces and bits. It will not get mixed up in the soil ever.
Exactly. So it's not that much beneficial to soil, right?
Of course, it is not. That's the reason we are talking about so many methods and processes why we should not dump them on the earth, why we should not dump them on the soil. Decomposers, read this importance of decomposers, tick those points, you will have an answer. You will have to read all these points. Tell me.
Can you tell the difference between decomposers and scavengers?
Decomposers, a group of organisms which will break down the organic matter in the plant and animal form. In the plant part, organic matter in the plant part, organic matter in the animal part, break them down to simpler forms and mix them in the soil water wherever the process is happening. What I told you, decomposers can convert the organic matter in the dead parts of the plants and animals to simpler forms. Decomposers. What did you talk about? Parasites. Scavengers. No, scavengers are not doing anything like this. What is a scavenger doing? A part of an animal is dead. The scavenger will take parts and pieces of this animal body and feed. The scavenger has the capacity of digesting the complex food types. Scavengers like the hawk and the eagle, they can feed on the dead flesh. Are they feeding on the live animals? No, they are feeding on the dead animal forms.
Now, eagle is a scavenger.
Scavenger. So when it is always at the top level. Eagle always at the top level.
Vultures do.
Vulture, eagle. They are brothers.
Also now can resist saprophyte particles.
Saprophyte. How are saprophytes different from bacteria? Saprophytes are all the fungi that we are talking about. Some examples of fungi, I talk about the mold and the mucus, okay, variety of different type of fungus. These group of organisms, are they bringing about the decomposition of the fallen flower on the soil? No. They are not bringing about the decomposition of the fallen flower, fallen fruit on the soil. But when the decomposition has started, and we understand that everywhere the fungal spores are enough, only that the fungal spores need the right environmental condition to start growing. Right now also we would understand that yes, some of the other type of fungal spores must be here. Otherwise, if these desks and the benches are not right now for a period of 15-20 days, you will come and see some damp layer will develop here. Now again, now that it is monsoon time, in your houses, right after a month, if certain those leather items and shoes and cupboards are not been regularly cleaned, you will see a white layer will form, a white cottony layer will form. Why? How come those spores came? It is always understood that the fungal spores are so small, they are so tiny and so light, they always keep floating and get dispersed in the air always. So there are plenty actually in the air. But now why don't we see them growing? Because the conditions are not suitable. It's dry, it's hot, it's still not humid. The moment the humidity sets up, the growth of fungus starts happily growing at that time. Understood? We talk about food chains, yes.
About algae.
About algae.
Algae is a bacteria or a saprophyte?
Algae is not a saprophyte at all. When we are talking about the algae are unicellular organisms. We would generally say that these algal forms are, some of them would generally have some of them are producers. When we are talking about the algae, the blue-green algae in the sea and the ocean, they are all producers. But some of the algae may not, the ones which are present in the soil. They are not saprophytes, they actually come under the category of producers. But not all algae again. There are algae which are red in color, brown in color. They may not be capable of producing food. But yes, majority of the algae that we understand are green algae, blue-green algae. These are autotrophs, producers. Food chain, what do you understand by food chain? The definition of food chain, you should remember the feeding habit. The feeding habit of any type of an organism. Say suppose I talk about some examples of the food chain. A typical example of a food chain, let us write. After that, you will try writing another two. I talk about certain type of food chains where the grasses are producers. Every food chain should start with a producer, autotroph. these are being fed upon by the grasshoppers. The grasshoppers will be fed upon by the frogs. The frogs will be fed upon by the snakes, and the snakes will be fed upon by the hawk or the eagle. Now, what are the categories? What are the categories? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are these categories? Producer, herbivore, primary consumer, secondary consumer. I'm sorry, primary, this I said herbivore, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, top consumer. So in these type of, this is a typical food chain that I talk about: producers, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, top consumer.
They are like omnivores, right?
Omnivores, but in this example, this is not an omnivore. In this example, this is not an omnivore.
So it's not common.
Not necessarily every food chain should terminate with an omnivore. Not necessarily every food chain should terminate with an omnivore.
So the answer we can write can be a big part.
Generally, we write top consumer is always at the last level of trophic level. The last level can be basically a scavenger or a big carnivore. Yes, sometimes it can be omnivore. You will write examples on your own. Yes, Remy.
Ma'am, can like secondary consumer come 2 times in a row or something? Like for example, frogs and snakes, they both can be termed as secondary consumers, right?
No, how can they be?
They are both small carnivores.
They are small, but the feeding habit in this chain, I cannot write this also secondary, this also secondary. No. This is feeding on this, so obviously this is more complex. This is more complex. So this has to be considered tertiary. So what is the sequence? Producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, top consumer.
Ma'am,
Now,
ma'am, so in this a food chain can it be defined as a like a biotic hierarchy?
biotic hierarchy means what? Is biotic hierarchy means the complexity level that you are talking about. We may not exactly talk about the complexity level. The frog and the snake, the complexity is not much different. But yes, this can feed on this. What is the definition of a food chain? The feeding relationships between different group of organisms. That is the typical answer that always you should write. If you frame your own answer, but this concept should be conveyed. What are you talking about? What is food chain? Are we only talking about the complexity? No, we are talking about what type of organism can feed on other. For example, I know that the frogs, and let me talk about some other group of organisms. Can I write the salamanders here? I know that the salamanders and the frogs are of the same group, but the salamanders never feeds on grasshoppers. So now we cannot write any type of an organism in any type of a food chain. Like whenever we are talking about a food chain, there has to be a feeding relationship. Food chain means what? The feeding relationship. What type of food one organism can feed on? So one type of organism is feeding something, and this is again being fed upon by some other group. If this is what is happening, this is what we talk about as a food chain. Now, when we are talking about this food chain, these are different levels. What are these levels called? These levels are called the trophic levels. What are these levels called? Trophic level. Trophic level means every category that we are talking about. Every category of organisms in this food chain. Every category of organisms in a food chain. Now, when I talk about these grasses, I would understand whatever plant it is, whatever organism it is, whatever producer it is always known that the producers will be able to trap only 1% of the solar energy to prepare the food. Upon whatever amount of incident energy is the incident sunlight. On the grasses, a large amount of sunlight is incident. But is the grasses able to absorb all of it? Or a huge amount of it? No, only 1% of the incident sunlight it is able to utilize to prepare its food. Now that it has prepared food, we always understand that now that it has prepared food, it has gathered certain amount of energy. And that is what these organisms are dependent on, one after the other. So say suppose I understand that these organisms have gathered a specific amount of energy, something like this. So this organism, when it feeds on the grasses, how much of the energy gets transferred to this organism, or how much of the energy these organism can afford to give to the other group nothing more than 10%. And the organism would keep 90% of the energy for its growth, for its multiplication, for its metabolism, etc. And the rule is standard for all. So I would say that now it goes to something around this. Now these organisms have what? Because they are not able to prepare food. So they have gathered only this much of energy from the autotrophs. Now that these group of organism feeds on this, these also can give away only 10% of the energy, leaving something around 80-90% for itself. So this goes on progressively. So what should I write? I would write like this. Again the 10% rule. What should I write? I would write like this. Again the 10% rule. What should I write? I should write like this. So is it possible that any type of organism feeding on the hawk? Basically we have not come across.
Because
Why
they
not?
don't get any
Hardly
energy.
any energy is left. So I'll come to this. Understand this concept first. So when we are talking about this, what is this? What are these groups of organisms I told you? Trophic levels. How many trophic levels are maximally found in a food chain? Not more than 5. That's why. In a feasible and working food chain in the nature. Now, for my choice, I can add another two groups of organisms, but that is not practically possible in nature. Practically possible food chains are what? Not more than 5 trophic levels. You are asked question, give reason. Why? Because after the 5th trophic level, there is hardly any amount of energy left to be passed on to the next. Progressively, what is this rule called? This is known as the 10% law of energy flow. What is it? 10% law of energy flow. What is 10% law of energy flow? Whenever one group of organism feeds on the previous, whenever one group of energy feeds on the previous, it can receive only 10% amount of energy from the previous, nothing more than that. Then why these organisms are not giving away 50, 60, 80% of it? No, generally 80-90% it will keep for itself, metabolism, growth, reproduction, etc., giving away only 10%. Yes, 10 grams.
That's how it use the energy for metabolism.
Which one is dead here?
Ma'am, you are telling that if it gives the 80 to 90% energy, the organism will not have an energy to metabolism or something. So if the organism is dead, so
Which organism is dead here?
if grasshopper is eaten by frog, so 10%.
Organism is eaten here, but the organism has got the organic matter in it. Organism still has the organic matter in it. And the organic matter, the moment it enters inside your body, it is going to give you some amount of energy. But when I talk about that the frogs are feeding on the grasshopper, is the frog getting all the 90%, 100% of the energy? No, because the frog has constantly been using that amount of energy when it is formed. So the energy is not stored, energy is constantly dissipated. Energy is never stored, So this is one. What else? What is 10% law of energy flow? This is what you'll have to study properly. What is 10% law of energy flow? Explain with an example. So some common examples. Can you write one more example of a food chain? Can you write with the similar categories? Don't forget to match those categories with the same number of trophic levels. How many number of trophic levels we have used here? 5. So with the same number of trophic levels, can we write another food chain? Grasses. I talk about grasses. What else can we think of? Grasses. I talk about another food chain here. Grasses may be eaten up by Grasses may be eaten up by. Talk about smaller forms first. In the food chain, start talking about the smaller, then go to the straight away. Don't put a big animal thing. Okay, fine. The locusts. These are fed upon by. Think. Snails also can feed upon this. Or something else. Salamander does not feed on locusts. Lizards, correct. Lizards. The lizards can be fed upon by the mongoose. Okay. And what else? This will be fed upon by rats. I'm sorry. Mongoose feeds on rats, so we could have added rats also here. What else? After the mongoose, what do I put? So it belongs to, now you get questioned this way. These group of organisms belong to what category of consumer?
Tertiary. No, secondary.
Primary, secondary, tertiary consumer.
Okay.
This is tertiary consumer. We are talking about smaller groups of animals. After the mongoose, what can we write? Snakes? Can we write snakes here? Snakes.
But like snake is a part of tertiary consumer.
In this example, it is different. It can be depending on what type of organisms you are choosing. Now, yes, sir.
If we write rat instead of mongoose, then we can write it as.
If you are writing rats here, then the rats can be fed upon by mongoose can feed on rats.
So that's how we can.
So you can interchange depending on what is the chain. So now try understanding. For us, do we always feed on only one type of food?
No.
We have alternative food. Today, if capsicum is not available in the market, I will buy cauliflower and go home. Tomorrow, if brinjal is not available, we have so many other options, no? So your mother brings so many different type of fruits, vegetables. One is not available, we go to the other. Same like this. These group of organisms, they always have alternative food chain. It is not only one single food chain working in nature. So always, now that I talk about these lizards, in place of these lizards, could I have used these words, frogs? I could have used frogs also here. So that means these locusts are being fed upon by frogs also, and the lizards also can feed upon this. So every type of an organism has got alternative feed. Frogs can feed on this. Lizards also can feed on this. This also can feed on this. This also can feed on this.
But can frogs feed on lizards?
Can frogs feed on lizards? No. Frogs will not feed on. These belong to the same category. They will not feed each other. They have to feed on something simpler. They can feed on this because they are complex. This is simpler. So what I'm trying to tell you is that in nature, only a single food chain will not work. There will be alternative food chains. So what is this entire network of food chains called? This is known as a food web. What is a food web? An interconnecting chain of food chains. Yes.
But in the first example, the snake is known
In
as
the first example, the snake is known as
the tertiary consumer.
In the second example, we have come across another food chain where it is considered as a top consumer.
So we can't write like frog as a secondary consumer.
We can write,
Frog as a secondary consumer.
in this example, it is a secondary consumer.
So tertiary as a tertiary consumer in that example.
In this example, no. Another example, let us write, where I would write grasshoppers, frogs, I have written, I write some other examples. I write some beetles and then, so where I have to choose something smaller than, Positions little bit changes whenever we are talking about the food chain. Every food chain will not follow. Not exactly fixed. Especially when I talk about the last or the top consumer, for the top we always understand it is always a bigger form. Majorly the scavenger. So what is the basic difference between the food chain and food web? For food chain we are talking about only one feeding relationship. Is this applicable in nature always? No. In the nature, we will always come across every type of an organism will always have alternative feed. So that means every particular food chain is interlinked with another food chain. Sometimes the frogs would feed on this, sometimes the frogs feed on this. If the grasshoppers are lesser, the frog goes for this. If the locusts are lesser, the frog goes for this. Interconnecting food chains. What are the benefits? Interconnecting food chains, the organism can feed on alternative food. The organism always has got alternative food. What did we understand here? There's one diagram of the food web. Try to find out how many food chains are there. There's a diagram there about the food web. Try to find out how many food chains are there. You count 6. You will be given this type of a diagram in your paper and you will be asked to count how many food chains. How many are there? 6. No. 4. No. More than even more.
7.
Look, see, don't give guessing.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7.
Grasshopper.
I can
If it is a
Frog. is eating the entire grasshopper. Why is it not getting the 100% of energy?
Because the amount of energy when the grasshopper has fed on the leaves, did it, after feeding the leaves, did it stand still?
No.
No metabolism, no breathing, no respiration, nothing. Was it still? Was it waiting for the snake to eat it up or the lizard to eat it up to get that whole amount of energy? No. After it had fed on the plants, leaves, constantly it is moving, growing, division going on, molting going on. So it has already lost so much of energy. And if it is eaten up by another animal, obviously that animal will not get all the amount of energy.
And what if the grasshopper ate grass and he got the energy? And as soon as he ate that, the frog ate. So, ma'am, what will happen, ma'am? How much energy will be?
Then also, whenever we talk about internally, the process of movement of the body fluids was going on. The process of movement was going on.
Within
So
a second,
within a second, the grasshopper is feeding on the plants, and then the other group is feeding on it. Then also it will not get hardly 10-15%, not more than that, because the internal processes, metabolism, circulation of the body fluid, all respiration. Respiration involves a whole lot of energy for this group of organisms. So the rule always says, what happened?
ma'am, it will
The rule always says that whenever we are talking about the loss of energy, the loss of energy is always there. So no organism will get a full amount of the energy ever. So the concept is never like this, that immediately and you get 100% of energy. It's not like this. She's tired of asking
Ma'am,
questions.
it's not exactly 10%.
Roughly 10. We say roughly 10. It is 10 to 15%. 10 to 15%. Yes.
So I have a question over there. For locusts, can we add like grass, like grass?
Grasses. I have connected this with grasses.
But what if over there becomes snakes? Like after snakes, we can add one.
After snakes, here you are saying after snakes. After snakes, it can be only a scavenger. After snakes, because we understand that the snakes will not be fed upon by the tiger, also lion, also wolf, or the fox, also. It can be only the kite, or the hawk, or the eagle. Only that many. So here, how many of you count?
Seven.
Like 6.
No, in that, if at all. So in this case, when we are talking about the hawk hardly gets anything. The hawk hardly gets anything. So what is an advisable situation? What do we understand in a food chain? 5 trophic levels, the last trophic level gets appreciable amount of energy. Beyond this, the last trophic level gets nothing. It gets nothing. How many food chains you got?
7.
7. Count. 7 food chains are there. Now you will practice writing. Take one question as homework. Write down example of a food chain in the form of a pyramid. The same thing we'll have to write it in the form of a pyramid. See here, this is known as the energy pyramid. This is known as the energy pyramid. How do we write it? The same concept we will have to write it in the form of a triangle with different levels. So here we can talk about the different levels here. So how many levels first you make? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. What are you supposed to write down here? The examples, the organisms. And what are you supposed to write on one side? Whether they are producer, consumer, etc., etc. So on one side you will write down whether what category. And in the boxes you will write down. Inside the triangle you will write down what examples. This you will do as homework.
Ma'am, this is not clear. But in the school we had a test on the light procedure and then it was asked for the transportation. So I think that it's like it gives out what excess water. Transpiration.
Transpiration.
Transpiration. So ma'am said we should cut marks for given out instead of given.
What is it? Definition of transpiration.
Excess water is given out from the stomata in like a form of water vapor. I wrote that. Which said if I wrote given out instead of removed, she cut marks.
Excess water is given out. Instead of given out, you are supposed to remove.
Because
No, it's the same.
water vapor.
That is never a keyword on that you are missing out. Excess water from a plant is released. Excess amount of water from a plant is given out. Even out is a standard, what is the code also?
This is not even not a problem.
Not a problem. But don't fight with your teacher. You be very sure about what you have written.
Mama, I don't do correct thing necessarily because I have written given out.
See my turn. No, not to worry.
Ma'am, as you said that if we have to add one more level, so it should be a
So
strategy.
I said if you add, then the chemistry is not getting anything.
But ma'am, if we after result, if we put the rat and then after that mangoes and after that
It becomes 6. It becomes 6. Then is the 6th group getting edited? If the 6th group is getting